bad communication habits are hampering the impact of your influence, placing a pall over your persuasiveness, and kiboshing the connection with your audience. Hi, I'm Park Howell, and we have a storytelling master who will help you overcome annoying storytelling tendencies today on your Business of Story. But one habit you should absolutely embed in all of your leadership, business, sales, and marketing communications is the use of the ABT, the and, but, therefore, Agile Narrative Framework. It is where all persuasive and influential business storytelling begins.
Those CEOs that can tell stories are the ones who grow revenues faster and have more compelling companies. But most CEOs suck at telling stories. Therefore, I'm teaching the ABT, and that's why Park Howell is my go-to resource.
The ABT gets right to the point. For sales, there's just nothing like it. I have used it with many of the people that I coach and work with, and it has changed their messaging completely. There's just nothing like it. It's great for sales, but it's great for anyone who has to communicate an idea very concisely, and for people who need to catch attention. It's very, very useful to learn how to use the ABT method.
Once I started using the ABT, I really started to understand the power of it. Taking years and years of storytelling knowledge, which is his expertise, and getting it concise and getting it down to just this really simple, fundamental structure, it helps you take these complex stories that you're trying to tell your client and make them simple. And when it's simple and it's understandable, that's when the client really gains a whole level of trust in what you're doing. The ABT is that structure to make that happen.
Now, you can put the ABT Agile Narrative Framework to work, clarifying your complex communications, hooking your audience in under 15 seconds, focusing all of your long-form material, especially presentations, making them all way more compelling, and generally owning any room with your business storytelling. As you heard, the ABT is short and sweet, but tricky. So you need to make a habit out of practicing it every single day to build your narrative intuition if you want to grow as a confident and compelling communicator. So start your ABT habit stacking right now at businessofstory.com/ABT. That's businessofstory.com/ABT, and put this messaging marvel to work for you. How does the ABT work on our primal pattern-seeking, cause and effect, decision-making, buying limbic brain? Well, our guest today has a special Easter egg for you at the end of the show, so you'll want to stick around with a quick explanation on the biomechanics of the ABT. But first, what bad storytelling habits are you in need of breaking? Former BBC TV journalist and creator of the Storytelling Tactics card deck, Steve Rawling, is here to help.
Telling rather than showing is definitely a bad story habit. People telling you what they mean rather than showing you what they mean. There's a really nice way of breaking the habit, a little test you can run in your own head. If you've sat down, you've written something, or you're planning to deliver something as a speech or whatever, and you should look at it and think, okay, when I give this information, whether it's verbal or written, doesn't matter. When I give this information, can people see what I mean? And by that, what I mean is there a little movie of any kind running in their head whilst I'm speaking to them? Can they see what I mean? And if the answer is no, these are just a bunch of opinions and facts. There's nothing wrong with opinions or facts, but you can't make a movie out of opinions and facts. So if there's no movie running, that's not a story, and people will not remember what you've said.
Steve is now an international business storytelling consultant. He helps designers, entrepreneurs, and academics tell great stories about their work. Steve reckons that he has told over 20,000 stories in his career, so he can probably help you tell yours too. Today, you'll learn why and how you must overcome the bad storytelling habits of using long words and exhausting sentences. The cure for expertitis. The momentous power of moments. Why you should never discount the other side of the story, and what Steve learned about storytelling by being made to do death knocks while also reporting on serial killers as a BBC journalist. All that and more for you on this special edition of The Business of Story with Steve Rawling. Steve, welcome to the show.
Mark, thank you very much for having me. It's good to be here.
And where are you coming to us from?
I'm in a little village just north of Manchester in the north of England. The great thing about this is I look out of my window here and I can see the hills.
Tell us, we're late August here in this recording. What are you seeing out there? Give us a little quick description of your countryside.
Okay, well, actually, it's grey sky. It's been raining all day, but we've had some pretty beautiful weather. There's a wind farm on the moorland up there. There are some old stone quarries. I take my mountain bike up there, and there's just me and the sheep, and lots and miles and miles and miles of fresh air. During lockdown, during the pandemic, that was my salvation up there. So I'm 5 minutes away from nothing and nobody for miles and miles around.
You get out in nature. You know, we have the same thing up here in northern Arizona where we moved to a year and a half ago during the pandemic and got out of that massively crowded Phoenix metropolitan area. And I'm the same way. We're right on a little lake here, and 2 blocks up and around some cabins, I've got a Coconino County trail, a Forest Service trail that I can get on and basically walk from here to New Mexico. Not that I ever would, but we are surrounded by one of the largest contiguous ponderosa pine forests in the world. So it's pretty beautiful.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah.
So I think I'm lucky here because I've got miles and miles and miles of trail walks that I can cycle on my mountain bike, and I can get on a trail and I can come home 10 hours later covered in dirt and absolutely exhausted and very, very happy.
That's the way to do it. I've got a mountain bike up here. I've yet to bust it out because I got a feeling I'm going to fall off that thing and bust my shoulder, break my hip. Who the hell knows what? But I got to do that. I got to bust that thing out.
Yeah. Right. Well, yeah, good little baby steps.
Baby steps is right. And I really appreciate you being here. I became aware of your work a few months ago when you came out with your Storyteller Tactics cards, which we're going to talk about here in a little bit. And then invited you on the show because I was really fascinated. I've seen a lot of those kinds of cards come out, and so many of them are sort of like parlor games, and I don't really feel like, you're going to get a lot out of them. But yours, on the other hand, quite interesting and quite powerful. So I want to have you on the show to talk about it, but get your backstory here a little bit. And our goal today, Steve, is to help our listeners break any sort of bad storytelling habits they and we might all share. So you ready to roll?
That's right. Yep, ready to roll.
All right. How are you the bad breaking storytelling habit guy? What's your background? How did you get into this stuff?
Well, I was an avid reader as a kid, like many, many kids are. So I've always enjoyed losing myself in a story. When I was 22 years old, didn't really know what to do with myself after I'd been to university. And I had a conversation with a friend I shared a house with, and she said, "Oh, you'll never guess what? I've just got a place on a training course with the BBC to be a journalist." And I was so envious. I was consumed that moment with envy for what she'd done. And I thought, oh, well, there you go. That's clearly what I want to do. So it set me down a track to becoming a journalist. And I started off freelancing. I ended up getting a very junior job in the BBC News. And spent a long time doing that. So radio news, TV news, documentary making, and it was tough. It was very, very tough at first. And we worked in a very, very busy news area in the north of England. And so I covered everything from, football homecomings, like Man United homecoming with 3 trophies on the positive side. On the negative side, you do court cases with serial killers and urban riots and and everything in between. Life's rich tapestry. And I just absolutely loved it. And I loved meeting people and listening to them and asking them questions and actually finding more. The older I got and the better I got at it, I could listen to somebody's story and then actually tell it back to them in a more concise and often more exciting way than they told it to me. Particularly noticed it in academia and in business, who would have a very formal way of describing what they were working on that was really boring.
Let's explore that for a second
yeah.
here, Steve. So when you heard someone's story and you had been doing this reporting for so long that it probably became sort of second nature to you to be able to retell it back to them shorter and more compellingly, what are a few of the things you do? I mean, when you look at that, how do you shorten that story so quickly?
Well, the thing really, okay, there's a piece of work which is just copywriting, where somebody sends you some copy and it's 500 words long, and the sentences are all 10 to 25 words long each. Each sentence is very long. They're using long words. The paragraphs are long. Okay, and there's a brutal piece of red pen work that you do where you go through that thicket of lengthy undergrowth and you slash it and you slash it. And you basically say, okay, that sentence is 3 lines long. Yeah, it's already 40 words long. We're going to break it into 3 sentences that are shorter. We're going to take that long word you're using and we're going to find an old, short word that does the same job that most people will understand. And we're going to take that big chunk of text and we're going to break. So there's a copy version of that story where you just make something more readable to the average person. And I often do, when I'm doing that kind of work with people, I show them a readability formula. You can test your writing online and see what's the average age somebody needs to easily understand your work. And an awful lot of business writing and a huge amount of academic writing, you need to be 18, 19, 20-year-old student level to understand it. And okay, there's a lot of people don't have that level of literacy. So if you're writing for mass market, if you're writing for the average guy in the street, well, don't assume they've got degree level education. But also, if you're writing for smart people, you're writing for intelligent people, they're also really busy people. Therefore, if you're asking them to compute their way through a sentence that takes, most people are reading on a phone, and it takes them 3 or 4 scrolls to get to the end of your sentence, well, forget it. You're losing them. Why make life hard for your reader? That's the first kind of way of attacking a story. But the other way that I find much more interesting is, so you talk to people, you get a conversation, and you dig and dig and dig. You dig a little bit deeper, and you look for the moment, the turning points. So what I used to find as a journalist, you'd turn up to meet somebody who was going to do an interview, say, for example, the boss of a company that are releasing a new product. And they'd want to do an interview, and they would have prepared in advance their version of the story, and they deliver it in a very kind of monotone or very sort of, it feels like it's rehearsed. And then my job was to go, oh, okay. So when you first started, what were your fears about? And was there a moment where you thought, oh God, this is not going very well? And did you have any setbacks? And what did the first people who tried it think of it? And all those kind of things. Which problems did you hit along the way? And by doing that, you're kind of digging. I'll give you a great example, real world example. So one client I was working with, he said, we do great quality work. We have the highest quality standards. Now, the trouble with that as a business statement is everyone says the same. Like, nobody is selling low quality, low standards. Now, they might be selling budget, right? Okay, but no one says we do low quality work. So when everyone's saying we do high quality work, it's wallpaper, it's vanilla. It makes no impact on the audience whatsoever because everyone is saying it. So this guy said, okay. And I said, well, give me an example. Do you have a guarantee on your work? And he said, oh, yeah, we have a guarantee. If anything goes wrong with the work we've done, we will fix it for free. And these guys, they were engineers. They repaired electric motors. That's their job, maintenance. I said, okay. So tell me, have you ever had to do work again under guarantee? And he said, oh, yeah, once. He said, that's right. He said, he was very proud. He said, we did 1,000 pieces of work last year and only one came back on the guarantee. And I said, tell me about the one. Right? Tell me about the one that came back. Because 999 that work is not a story. Tell me about the one that came back. And what he told me was a really good story about quality. Right? And it went like this. He said, okay, the guys in the factory, they sent us their motor. We repaired it because it had burned out. We sent it back to them with a 12-month guarantee. 6 weeks later, they're on the phone saying, your motor has burned out again. What are you going to do about it? So this time we sent our engineer to their factory, and sure enough, the motor had burned out. And so he fixed the motor, and then he noticed that the drive shaft from the motor to the piece of machinery was loose. And it was the loose drive shaft that was causing the motor to burn out. So he fixed that as well, for free. And he said to the angry customer, here's what I've done. It wasn't our fault, but I've fixed it for you. Now, that story was there all along, but it was just buried, and they never thought to tell each other. Although they told each other, they never thought to tell their customers that story. But a bit of digging, and that's the story that comes out. And then you realize, oh, that's what quality looks like. It looks like a guy turning up at a factory when something's gone wrong and going way above and beyond and actually fixing the thing that wasn't his fault. Right? That's what quality looks like. That's the company you want to work with. I'll tell you another brilliant example. Sometimes they don't have to be long stories. They can be super short stories. There's an English phrase for building projects. I don't know if this translates into American, where at the end of a project, you have a thing called a snag list.
A snag list.
Yeah, so a snag list is you go around. So let's say you've had some work done on your house. Right? They've built a new extension on the side of the house, and you go round at the end when they think the job is done, and you go, there's a gap in that window, that socket's a little bit loose, and there's a patch there that the painting hasn't quite taken. So these are the little snags. They're a big job, but every job has little snags at the end, and the snag list is your chance to catch all the little things and tidy them up. Okay. So I was having some work done on a house about 5 years ago, and I was talking to builders who were coming round, and it was about sort of $30,000 worth of work, so it was quite a big job. And this one firm of builders said, it was a family firm, and the guy said to me, my wife does the snag list. Right. And that is a story. My wife does the snag list, because I said, oh, go on, tell me more. Tell me. And he said, we finished the job. Before we sign the job over to you, she comes around and she checks our work, because he said she's got a woman's eye on that. We're just blokes.
She's quality control.
She's quality control. My wife does the snag list. And from that moment on, I thought, I want you to do my house conversion. I don't want anybody else. I want you, because I've built a level of trust in that little moment, that little story there. One sentence opens up a whole story, and I now trusted him more than anybody else. Now, sad part of the story is he was too busy to do the work, and I ended up with a bunch of builders who made an absolute mess of things, and I ended up in a long legal fight with them. So
so you couldn't snag him for a snag list, and then you had to actually pay the price.
Absolutely.
So let's explore some of these bad habits I think we all get into if we're not paying attention. And if we're writing a story, it can go on and on and on, and we use the big, $100 words when the $1 word may work. So is that kind of bad habit number one when we are looking at our work, to go back and edit? Be judicious with your red ink and go ahead and get yourself cleaned up, shortened up.
It's a little bit about it. That is partly to do. It's also thinking, well, why are you using that kind of language? And sometimes it's one of two things. There are two bad habits rolled into one there. The first one is kind of expertitis, where expert is speaking to expert. So if you've got two engineers talking to each other, or two landscape painters, or two, it doesn't matter, two experts talking to each other, they will talk almost in a shorthand form of communication because they absolutely know what they're talking about and each other know what they're talking about. And they don't need to go into long explanations and they don't need to tell stories because, okay, they're talking
We call
technical.
that our inner circle, Steve, when we're teaching our
Yeah.
ABT and the 5 primal elements of a short story. Is sometimes you don't need a story for that inner
absolutely.
circle. If everyone can complete your sentences for you and they understand your jargon and they understand the data, then you can cut to the chase. But that's like a dartboard in one of your pubs out there. That inner circle is quite small, and we make the mistake of people thinking that there are a lot more people in our inner circle than there actually are. So we're talking about the outer circle here, right?
Yes, and the difference between the inner circle and the outer circle, you can sometimes, I think Steven Pinker, who's a great writing coach and expert on writing, calls it the curse of knowledge. And the curse of knowledge is when you are an expert in something, you forget what it's like to not be an expert. And you forget how little other people know about your thing. And you forget to explain. So that's a terrible writing habit. But also, here's the thing that experts do, and we all kind of do it. So we go through life and through experience, and life is a series of snapshots of experience, sort of slice after slice after slice after slice of life experience. And what we tend to do is we kind of abstract the wisdom out of those snapshot moments. And we, after 5 years of doing something, you've seen so many different permutations, so many different examples, that what you do is you've established a whole bunch of insights and expertise. And when you're speaking as an expert, you just tell people the expertise. Okay? Here's what I know. That's fine because you know because you were there, but we don't because we weren't. And there's something about dropping back into a moment, not every single moment, because that would be too boring, it would take too long. You drop down from the wisdom, you drop back into a particular moment where something, bang, something changed, you learned something happened that was, that stuck in your mind. The fact that it's stuck in your mind in the first place means that there's a story there. Okay, you learned something new, something changed. Great. So you drop, as an expert, you need to drop back into that moment and give us the moment. And then say, okay, that's how I learned. Now you give us the expertise. But if you don't drop back into the moment, and the moment is like a little movie, if you don't drop back into the moment, we can't see what you mean in the way that you can because you were there. So that's the first thing, is kind of expertitis, this curse of knowledge, and the habit of staying in the abstract, staying above in where the expert wisdom is, and forgetting to drop back into the moment.
Steve, how I help people overcome that, and even myself, is I'll write something up and it'll be curse of knowledge, the expertise problem. And then I'll go, okay, well, I'm droning on and on about knowledge and wisdom and insights and some data here. Let me stop that and drop, like you said, into a moment. How do I know this information? When did I first learn about it? And then I go, you know what? I'm going to tell that story because it's kind of interesting and there's a really powerful aha moment on it. But by the same token, or on the other side of that token, I will think about it. And also, I remember the moment that I learned that, but it's not particularly interesting or inspiring. So I will park it to the side and go, you know what? I don't think I'm going to use that one because it's sort of meh. And
the thing is, storytelling is not a science. It is that you don't know how a story is going to land until you try it. Now, if you try the same story 5 times and it falls flat every time, then you're just being daft. You're just banging your head against a brick wall. But you won't know until you try which stories are going to fly. And then then of course you need to have a range of stories because one of the cardinal sins, really bad habits. One of the cardinal sins is telling the same old story. And you cannot tell the same story twice to the same audience without them thinking, oh God, here he goes again. Now, you can get away with that in family groups because families love to hear the time when you dropped the turkey on Thanksgiving, and they love that story.
And they want to relive that with you.
They want to relive it because they're family, but your colleagues don't. Your colleagues don't. They're busy.
Steve, I spent 4 years going out to Washington, D.C. and working with Air Force generals from brigadier to 4-star generals, and it was in spring and fall. So I was making 2 storytelling sorties every year out there, and it'd be a half-day session working with them. And I've got this amazing story that happened to my wife following 9/11, the fall of the Twin Towers. Her father, who was an Air Force fighter pilot in World War II in Korea and Vietnam, had passed away prior to that. And I remember she was praying to him, saying, "Daddy, why are they over here blowing us up? Why do we have to have all this war?" And actually, a week later, in a Tuesday morning store, on the following Tuesday morning from that fateful Tuesday morning of 9/11, she was walking in the store, and she actually found a model airplane of her father's F-86 with his name on the cockpit shield there. Yes. And talking about an amazing story, well, I would start my first training with that and share that as a connection story to build trust. And I would say, look, I have never served, but I did marry into an Air Force family.
Yes.
And then I would go on and tell that story. And I mean, it would bring some of those generals to tears. I mean, some of them would even come up and say, "Is that for real?" And I go, "Yeah, here's the picture of the plane," or whatever. Well, going back to this thought about having to open every single one of those trainings with that story, I had to do it because the leadership that brought me in said, "We want you to keep using that story." So there would be a number of people that had already heard it, which always then made me feel a little bit like, oh, here I go again on it. But it was all new attendees every single time we did it. So it was a room full of anywhere from 20 to 200 people, and they hadn't heard it. So I had this weird dichotomy of, man, I'm going to be telling the same story that the leadership that has brought me in has heard 10 times already, but it's new to all these other people. So how do I keep it interesting to the folks that have heard it, as well as not overthink it for those that hadn't?
I had an interesting one recently where I'd been invited to do a keynote speech to a conference of 500 people in the property business about the using story. And then shortly after that was I asked to work with a group of 10 property experts, and I had to say to them, "Look, how many of you were in that conference? Because if any of you were there, I can't do the same stories. Because if all of you were there, I certainly can't. It's got to be completely fresh stuff." Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely right. I mean, you can. It's interesting. You can. It's how because that's interesting. That's not even your story. It didn't happen to you. It doesn't matter. Because as long as you don't pretend it was yours, I mean, that's one of the, obviously cardinal sins of storytelling is passing off somebody else's story as your own. But, you don't have to. You say, "Look, this happened to somebody really close to me. Let me tell you how she felt when." That's it. That's all you need to do. And we will go. It's like we leap from character to character. I don't know so my wife's in the middle of reading the Game of Thrones novel series, right? And she is going through, these books are like, 4 inches thick, and she's going through about a book a week of these absolutely gigantic books, and I'm very intrigued by this. And I'm an avid reader too. But when you're in those books, you leap into the character. You don't watch the character from a distance. You leap into the character, and you live and see the world through their eyes. And so all you need to do if you need to tell someone else's story is say, "This happened to a young Air Force pilot." Right. And straight away we're all there. Even though we've never flown a plane before, we can jump into that person's skin. You just give us a few little pointers to help us jump into that person's skin, and we do it. It's an amazing feat that we all seem capable of.
That's why we call it the bewitchery of storytelling.
Well,
so we teach the applied
is.
science, because I think there is a science to storytelling.
There is.
That you use the formula like we use the and, but, therefore, the ABT, or the 5 primal elements of a short story: time, stamp, location, central character, who is your audience going to relate to, the action and surprise that happens that makes your business point for you, and then, of course, the 10-step story cycle system for long-form communications, presentation work, and whatever. So that's the applied science side. But to your point, Steve, that bewitchery of it, when done well, or even done more right than well, you can actually get that audience leaning in, and they are feeling what's going on.
There's a very interesting book I've just read by a guy who's based in a US university called Angus Fletcher. He's an English writer, but he's basically describing the history of literature as a history of very clever innovations in the field of emotional control, emotional manipulation.
What's the name of the book?
The book is called, it's on my desk, it's called Wonder Works, all one word, Wonder, W-O-N-D-E-R, Works, W-O-R-K-S, by Angus Fletcher. And it's an absolutely fascinating study of how different writers discovered ways to take our emotions and move them in different directions to give us a sense of wonder, a sense of awe, or a sense of fear, or a sense of control, or a sense of intimacy. And it's absolutely fascinating. The guy's a genius. And it's really, really interesting to think that's what when you're setting out to tell a story, you're basically should be doing two things. So stories are two things, I think. But they are socially useful information. So it's one human sharing useful information with other humans, which is often about humans as well. Okay. So socially useful information. The second thing you're doing with the story, because you can give people socially useful information in an instruction manual. So I've just bought a new washing machine. There's an instruction manual. Because it's an expensive washing machine, I actually read it rather than just plugging it in and pressing go. Okay, so I actually read it. Okay, so you can do socially useful information in a instruction book. What you can't do in the instruction book is the second thing stories do, which is emotional connection. And stories allow us to connect with each other emotionally in the most powerful way. I think the only things that come close are music and dance connect us as well.
On this idea of emotion, Steve, let's talk about what you learned as a young journalist on the quote unquote death knock scenario.
So this is an interesting story. Okay. So I use this story sometimes in the training room when I'm talking to people about, okay, what do stories need and how important it is to include emotion in the story. So it kind of goes like this. Okay, so I'm a young journalist. I'm 23, 24 years old, and I'm starting my first job in the BBC. And at that point, if you were to look at my emotional kind of radar, it was very, very positive and very up because I'm in the biggest news organization in the world, and I'm feeling very clever and feeling very smart. Particularly clever because I got there without doing the 2 or 3 year apprenticeship in local newspapers, which in those days was the standard way to get into the BBC. And I'd gone in straight as a graduate trainee, and I was a trainee researcher, which is the kind of bottom rung on the ladder. So I'm very pleased with myself at that point, until one morning when the news editor said to me, okay, Steve, there's been a plane crash in Australia. A guy's been killed. We think he's from this part of Manchester. Can you go and knock on the door and see what his family are saying? See if they'll do an interview. And I just was completely put aback, and I was shocked, and I thought, oh, no, I don't want to do that. And I just said, no, I can't do it. And because I'd never done it before, because I hadn't done that apprenticeship in local papers, I hadn't had to do it. And so she then said, okay, turned to a colleague and sent somebody else to do it. And it was a real shock. And it really kind of brought me down to earth, because I thought, well, Catchy, that actually is what this job involves. It involves intruding on the lives of people at the worst possible moment. Okay. So I had to kind of learn to do it by watching other people, going out with another journalist and seeing how they did it, and then carrying on and doing it again and again until I kind of got comfortable, if that's the right word. I got comfortable with doing it. Now, I mentioned serial killers at the beginning of the podcast. I actually got to cover the trial and the subsequent public inquiry into the behavior of a guy called Harold Shipman, who was a family doctor in Manchester, and he killed no one knows. The final estimate is that he killed about 250 of his own patients over a 40-year career. So he was the most prolific serial killer outside of wartime that we've ever known in this country. Now, I had to do an awful lot of knocking on doors, because that's 250 families who we could potentially approach for interviews. And so I got very good at it and got very comfortable with it. And actually to the point where I could square it off and say to my conscience and to them on the doorstep, I would say the same thing. I would say, look, this is your chance to give your side of the story. And actually that was really powerful, because often these people had not been listened to properly by the police or by the authorities. And they were, not in all cases, but in lots of cases, they were keen to talk. And I gave them a chance to talk. So, okay, that's an example of a story. And the point about it is, the bit that I remember personally most clearly is that awful feeling of, oh, I can't do this. That awful feeling of being found out. And that's what makes the story stick in my mind. Now, it kind of works as a teaching story, because what I often do with that story is I tell the story, then ask people to go into pairs or threes or whatever in the training room, and just quickly write down 3 things that they judge from my character based on that story. And I tell them they can write positive or negative. So I get a whole range of things like, humble, professional, cynical, manipulative, a whole range of different qualities come out after they've had a couple of minutes to think. And I say to them, look, if I'd started at the beginning of this presentation and said, hi, my name's Steve, I'm humble, professional, you'd have thought, who is this guy? Right? Who the hell are you? And why are you telling us who you are? Why are you telling us what your character is? Well, just that sounds like nonsense. So the point is that you don't need to tell people. You can't tell people what kind of character you are. You have to show them.
Yeah, so that's bad habit number 2 here then, is we get too caught up in telling with our opinions and our assertions that it's just going to put us at odds for our audiences, because they're like, oh yeah, if you're so smart, now show me how. Start with the show. Tell them a story. Let them arrive at what the business point or the conclusion is, because now you are really incorporating them into your story.
Absolutely.
I mean, isn't that really the goal of all propaganda? And granted, propaganda has a bad context to it. But if you think about it, we all use propaganda every single day when we are trying to get someone to see our way of thinking, feeling, doing, by sharing a story and let them draw their conclusion, which is, by the way, the same conclusion we want to get them to. But instead of us pounding our chests and with our opinions and assertions and saying, this is my character, let them arrive at what they believe your character is, right?
Exactly. So it's kind of pull rather than push. You're inviting them in rather than shoving them through a particular doorway. The harder you push people, the more stubbornly they dig their heels in, usually. So no, telling rather than showing is definitely a bad story habit. People telling you what they mean rather than showing you what they mean. So that's definitely there's a really nice way of I think of breaking the habit. A little test you can run in your own head. If you've sat down, you've written something like a newsletter or a bit of email copy or whatever it is. You've written something, or you're planning to deliver something as a speech or whatever. And you should look at it and think, okay, when I give this information, whether it's verbal or written, doesn't matter. When I give this information, can people see what I mean? And by that, what I mean is there a little movie of any kind running in their head whilst I'm speaking to them? Can they see what I mean? And if the answer is no, these are just a bunch of opinions and facts. There's nothing wrong with opinions or facts, but they don't make a movie. You can't make a movie out of opinions and facts. You can make a documentary, but anyway, you can't make a movie. So if there's no movie running by the time you've finished reading that text, that's not a story, and people will not remember what you've said. So, for example, in the conversation we've been having, you've been talking about the lake and the trails and the fact that you're worried about falling off your mountain bike. Yes, all of those things conjure a movie in my head. We've been talking about washing machines and maintenance work on my home and fixing electric motors. Air Force generals and model aircraft and all of these things create vivid images in the person's head.
They fire up the theater of the mind, right?
The
And
theater
that's
of
what
the
you're
mind.
trying to do so that you become memorable.
I tell you what, the really fascinating thing, the deeper, I said there's no science to storytelling. I think storytelling is a craft. So it's not a science. It's not an art that only artists can do. It's in the middle. It's a craft. And therefore you can get better by practicing. Just like you can get better at putting up shelves, right, and doing woodwork, you can get better at storytelling by practicing. Okay. Now, having said that, there is some fascinating science behind what's going on when we listen to words. So we listen to words or we read words on a page. We process the meaning of the language in our visual cortex. So the part of our brain that processes images coming in through the eyes is also processing words we're hearing or listening or reading on a page. And so we are effectively running a little movie in our heads to understand the words. And what's fantastic about story is not only do you have the little movie, but you can jump into a character and see the movie from inside their skin. And that's what we find so fascinating about story. But you can do that with your writing. And all you have to do is say, imagine you're an Air Force pilot turning up to work on your first day. Okay. Well, straight away, I can see a guy in a uniform, and then it's me. So all you need to do is cue people in the right way. Yeah, and say, so the experts talking about their wisdom need to say, for example, get back into the moment, back into one single moment where one thing happened.
Singular narrative, and it's so important, isn't it? Just to have that singular narrative. You're not going off and shooting from all over the place.
Absolutely.
Let's talk, Steve, a little bit about the zebra language. I think that's interesting. Talking about being in someone's skin, you can picture a zebra, right? Let's go to that bad habit.
So zebra language. This is a bad habit. So basically, the story around zebras, I do some work with the BBC's wildlife teams who make wildlife documentaries. So I get to hear animal stories all the time. Okay, researchers are out in the savannah, so they are watching zebras through these binoculars and trying to work out how zebras behave with each other. Like, what's life like for a zebra? That's what they're trying to figure out. But it's very difficult because every time they take their eyes off one zebra, right, he or she disappears into the herd and they lost him. And so they decided to get like a dart gun or something and a paintball gun and put a marker on the flank of the zebra they're going to watch so they can follow him because he's got a red paint stain on his backside. Okay, what they discovered very quickly is anytime they tagged a zebra, that zebra got eaten next by the lion because the lion could follow that zebra through the herd, right? In the past, the zebras just disappear amongst each other and the lion is like constantly chasing a fresh zebra. Whereas if he can follow one identifiable zebra, he's constantly chasing the same zebra who quickly tires.
It's like putting a 50% off coupon on the rack.
Absolutely.
It's like, oh, there you go. They're doing those zebras no favors, were they?
Absolutely. So basically, the zebra's stripes don't camouflage it against the savannah. The zebra's stripes camouflage it against other zebras. Right. Okay. Sometimes the language we use is camouflage and we are hiding in the pack. So when you are using the same kind of business jargon as everyone else in your business, you're doing zebra and you are hiding in the pack. And what you're saying is, I'm just like all these other guys. Now, there's a reason why people do that, and that is because they're slightly scared of imposter syndrome, that I don't belong here. And so if they feel like a zebra under threat, they want to blend in. Okay. The trouble with that is, in a marketplace, you need to stand out. Therefore, you need to adopt kind of peacock language rather than zebra language. And a peacock language is basically, look at me. So yeah, the zebra language comes from a fear of imposter syndrome. And
so how do you fix that?
How do you fix it? You look around at what everyone else is saying and think, right, everyone else is saying this. Therefore, I've got to go beyond this. I've got to be different if I'm going to stand out. There's something in poker. I don't know if you play poker, Park. There's something, the idea of table stakes. So if you go to a high stakes game, you've got to have $10,000 before you can even sit at the table. Those are your table stakes, and everything else is then on top of that. Well, in a way, when businesses talk about their kind of quality marks or their environmental credentials or their standards that they hit, yes, those are your table stakes, right? You shouldn't even be in business if you can't do those things. Therefore, there's no point really talking about them because everyone else is saying the same. You're just blending into a herd of other businesses who do the same thing as you. So you've got to think, okay, what are the zebra stripes around me? Okay, what is everyone saying in my business? Okay, I can almost discount those things from my story because they're just vanilla, they're just wallpaper, they're lift music, they don't stand out. So what else do I need to say? How do I either go one step above everybody else, or everyone else is going left, I'm going right. Everyone else is zigging, I'm zagging. Yep. But in a way that makes sense. So, I'm going to stand out from the crowd, but not just by doing something stupid. I'm going to stand out from the crowd by doing something clever. So that's how you break that habit. You look around, you think, what is everyone else saying and talking about? There's no point me saying, me too, me too, me too. Okay? What have you got that makes you unique, makes you special? I had a great story from a group of estate agents. These are guys who are real estate. Realtors, do you call them in America?
Yeah, real estate agents.
Yeah,
sure.
Real estate
and they're a
agents.
dime a dozen, so they're all zebras. They all look alike. They all sound alike.
So this guy, I had a room full of estate agents, and I said, okay, 3 minutes each. Tell me what's your USP. What makes you special? And the first 9 all said the same thing. Customer service, dedicated, professional, above and beyond, zebra, 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 zebra. Okay. Then this one guy said, okay, I've got all of those, but I've got some weird stuff as well. And he showed us this picture, and he said, this is a floor plan of a house, and it was drawn in pen, like black ballpoint pen. He said, this is a floor plan of a house. I drew this when I was 10 years old. He said, even when I was 10 years old, I was obsessed by houses. I used to go into the local estate agents in our village and pick up the brochures, right? And then I used to draw floor plans based on what I could see in the brochures because I was that nerdy as a kid. Okay. Now, here's the thing. Number 1, there's a movie playing. You can see this. You've never met this guy. He's called Peter. You've never met him. But you have a little movie in your head of 10-year-old Peter with his ballpoint pen. Okay, that's first thing. The movie is playing. Second thing, his weird stuff is what you need. If he's going to sell your house, that's the kind of weird stuff you need. You need someone who's kind of obsessed about the nitty-gritty, the detail of selling a house. So, okay, he now stands out. He's gone zebra, 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 peacock. And the peacock is the weird stuff.
I've got a friend, Rich Anderson, who's in a very highly commoditized business like real estate, but he's in the trophy business. They make little trophies, big trophies for kids, baseball, soccer, football, chess, you name it. They inherited the family business. So Northwest Trophy has been at it for a long, long time. And of course, you can order trophies from anybody. Talking about a commoditized business. And I asked Rich, what's different about Northwest Trophy? And he goes, just what you said, Steve, customer service. And I go, but that's not a differentiator because everyone else is going to say that. Are they going to buy? You don't want to be the low-cost leader because there's no margin in that and, whatever. So he kept saying it's customer service. There's nothing else that really differentiates us. So I said, okay, give me an example of what you're talking about. And he goes, he's the owner. He and his brothers own it, right? Well, they had like 300 trophies that they needed to get over to Spokane, Washington, which is about 5.5 hours away from Seattle, Washington, right before the Thanksgiving holiday. For the weekend before that, they had this big girls' soccer tournament.
Yep.
And for whatever reason, they were having some challenges getting the trophy stuff together, getting all the supplies and whatever. They got them all made, and they didn't have time to ship them. So Rich got in his Suburban, loaded up the back of his rig with 300 some kids' trophies, ran them all the way across 6 hours on a Friday night. And as they kicked off on Saturday, he delivered the trophies to him. And I go, that is an amazing story. And they have a whole ton of stories. But what it led to, Steve, is their UVP, or even their story framework, is Northwest Trophy. Customer service so good, you'll want to give us a trophy.
That's very good.
So that's how we wrapped our arms around a commoditized brand offering such as customer service, but we had fun with that UVP, and then we backed it up with all of those little moments where they went above and beyond to make sure that your kids got their trophies.
So there's a tactic that I developed for the Storyteller Tactics, and it's probably my favorite card in the entire box. There's 50 odd cards in the box, and this one I is my go-to. I go to it quite a lot. I've got about 5 or 6 favorites, but this is one of them. And I call this tactic movie time, and it's for the reasons we've discussed already, that the good story gets a movie playing in your head. There are three ingredients to a good business story. And the first one is the action. There has to be something happening, a person doing a thing. And in this case, it's your friend realizing that he's going to miss the delivery, therefore packing his trunk and driving for 6 hours. Okay, action. There also has to be emotion. And the emotion is, well, imagine those girls turning up on the Saturday with no trophy at the end of it all. Imagine how their parents would feel, and imagine how your friend would have felt letting them down. Okay. The second bit, dig a bit deeper. What did the guy who's running the tournament say when he realized someone's just driven 6 hours to deliver these trophies? He's going to be surprised and delighted. Also, all the emotions there. And then only after you've given people the action and the emotion do you get to give them the meaning. So the moral of this story is, our customer service is so good, you'll give us a trophy. Okay, but what you find in most business writing is people basically don't buy you a movie. They don't take you to the movies. They just give you the moral of the story. They don't give you any action. They don't give you any emotion, and then they expect you to remember their meaning. And of course you won't, because your head is full of better stories. So that's a really, really simple. If you want one simple tool to kill probably 90% of your bad habits, it is, are you running a movie in that person's head with the words you're using? And if the answer is no, then you're not telling a story. You're in bad habit world. And
well, let's talk about your Storyteller Tactics deck to help us get us out of our bad storytelling habits world. Yep. What is it? How do we use it? Where do we get it?
Okay. It's a deck of cards, and each card has one idea on it of either where do you find your story, or what is an ingredient of story, or how do you structure your story, or how do you polish your story. So basically, there are one idea, one card, and on the back of the front of the card will say, okay, what's this all about? When do you need to use it? And on the back of the card, it's, okay, how do you use it? So with movie time, it's anytime you need to get someone to see what you mean, try this card, flip it over, and it talks about action, emotion, and meaning. Okay, and tells you what those things mean. And so that's one card. So there's 50 odd cards. They sort of arrange themselves in a sort of pattern. So some of them are about understanding how stories actually work and what's really going on behind a story. And then some of it's about where do you find your story. Some of it is interesting. Some of it's about your character. You, the person in the story, have a character. How do you make your character the one you want people to see. Then there's a few cards that deal with structure, of structuring a story, so it has a proper beginning, middle, and end. And then there are other cards which are about writing and communicating style. So all in total, as I say, about 50 odd cards. We then have a kind of system where you think, okay, so there are cards that we call recipe cards, where you use one card to combine other cards. So one of these cards is called Stories That Sell. And if you put those 5 on the back of the card, there's 5 cards. And if you put those 5 together, you should be able to come up with a story that will help you sell things. There's another one called Stories That Lead. And you get the idea. Now,
and is this a game, or is this more like an instructional index card deck?
It's more like a tarot card reading. I'll be honest. It's more like somebody complained that the recipe metaphor didn't really work. They said, look, if I'm making a cake, you give me 5 ingredients and 6 steps and I have a cake. Where stories don't work like that. So then there's more like us. So basically what you do is you play the card. So you put the cards out. Well, how I use them anyway. I figure out what people need. So for example, sales export drive, company doing an export drive. And so I would pick out a story card about understanding your audience, and then one about social proof stories that are useful in selling, and then another card to help you develop a pitch that you're going to be going into a sales meeting. And then I'll see which ones the customer responds best to and go from there. So the reason why I did cards, not a book, I've written books before, but I went for the card model precisely because it's so flexible. So if you've got a book, you tend to go from the beginning to end, work your way through it. Whereas with the cards, you can start in the middle, and you might only use 3 or 4 cards over and over again.
But you want to start with the end in mind, right? You want to start with who's my audience? What am I trying to trigger? And then what am I trying to get them to do? And then you use the deck to help shape how you're going to tell those stories.
Yes. There's a place so some of the cards help you with kind of conversational storytelling. So that ability to just drop really quickly into a story, or also to be able to turn on a dime and go, I'm losing people here. I'm trying to explain something to them and I'm losing them. How do I get their attention back on me? So some of it is conversational, unplanned, spontaneous storytelling. Some of it is definitely planned, structured. So for example, if people sometimes would say to you, well, what do you actually do? Or you're bringing out a new product and they say, yeah, but what does it do? Or you're working on something and they'll say, yeah, but what's it about? You have to then give them a really good, punchy little summary. And I think that kind of spontaneous storytelling, we've talked before about the really bad habits of storytelling. One of the worst habits is boring people. Yep.
That's our arch nemesis, isn't it?
Absolutely.
You can't be boring.
You
can't communicate and care, but bore. Therefore, tell a story.
Yeah. And the story has to be about change. Yeah. It cannot. So if you cannot put your finger on, this is changing. This matters because it's changing. This matters to you because, what you need is changing. There's new information here. The world is changing. That's how you put your finger on the story and say, okay, this is what you need to know. And that is a good skill. And it's slightly different. That kind of spontaneous storytelling is slightly different from a kind of structured, okay, I've got 5 minutes to make a presentation. Both are important, but you'll do a lot more of the first one and not as much of the second.
Steve, where can people find the deck Storyteller Tactics?
So Storyteller Tactics is sold through a publishing company called PipDecks, which is PIPDECKS, PipDecks. They sell a number of different card decks, and Storyteller Tactics is one of them, and they're sold through pipdecks.com. I'm going to do the sales thing now. So as well as the actual cards, I mean, the thing is, we actually on that website, we give away all the content of all the cards for free. So if you go through that website, you'll find a web page for every single card I've written, with every single word, is there for free. But we think people get real value out of having the cards. Because I don't know about you, but I think on paper much better than I do on a screen. And if you're doing a workshop with more than one person, you need paper. And the cards work really well in that physical, tactile, shuffling things, turning them over. That really, really helps people think, I think. I mean, we've got tens of thousands of customers already who could have just gone to the website and got it all for free, but they've spent, in some cases, hundreds of pounds to get the physical cards. Okay, that's the first thing. It's all there for free. The second thing, though, is if you do decide to buy, as well as getting the kind of the box of cards, you also get access to a community of other users. So everyone else who's bought the cards is in this Slack community, swapping tips and ideas and asking questions and getting answers. But also we've added some extra digital content as well, so that, for example, you can get access to a digital collection of videos where every card has a short 5-minute video explaining how to use it. So all that sort of stuff is... So, as I say, we think it's so good that we can afford to give it away for nothing and still sell really quite high volumes.
And I can't get it on Amazon.com. I get it at PipDecks, PIPDECKS.com.
Yeah. I actually don't think you can get it on Amazon. I think their pricing model is a bit. Somebody's selling them on eBay. Somebody's obviously bought one and decided to sell it, and they're selling it on eBay.
Reselling them for you. Well, Steve, thanks so much for taking the time to be here. Where can people learn more about you and your good work?
Best way to contact me is through LinkedIn. One of the lovely things about this publishing, about Storyteller Tactics, I get 2 or 3 contacts a month from people who've just said, I've bought your cards, I really like them, can we connect? And that's just, that's nice. It's a nice thing to happen.
Yeah.
To get unsolicited positive feedback is lovely. So LinkedIn is fantastic. I think there's only one Steve Rawling on LinkedIn who does storytelling, and that's me.
And that's you.
So yeah,
and I'm lucky. I'm the only Park Howell out there that does storytelling because I have such a weird name, Park Howell. So
it's a good tip for the John Smith storytellers out there. They need to think of something else.
That's tougher. Well, thanks so much for being here. I really appreciate you taking the time and sharing your new deck, Storyteller Tactics, with our listeners.
Brilliant, Park. Thank you for having me.
And thank you all for listening to this edition. Again, go check it out. I mean, Steve's basically giving away all of his intellectual product right there at pipdecks.com. But get the cards because I'm like him. I'm a big believer that you got to have it. You got to play with them. You got to write stuff down. I don't type digitally, when I'm taking notes. Mine is always handwritten. And I've had a few other people on just recently talking about agile communications and the importance of pulling out that pen or pencil and literally, viscerally sit down and write down your thoughts. There's just a way it connects your world with your brain better than the digital environment. And I feel like that the Storyteller Tactics deck does the exact same thing. So if you like what you heard, share this episode with some of your friends, family, colleagues, those that could really benefit by growing as more confident and compelling communicators using the power of story and the Storyteller Tactics deck. If I can be of service to you, come on over to the Business of Story. And remember our brand new ABT course, the ABTs of Agile Communications, where you are going to learn the applied science of the and, but, therefore, to create that bewitchery in under 15 seconds of getting your audience to truly lean in and understand and appreciate what you're talking about. Check that out at businessofstory.com/ABT. And until next Monday, when I'll have another amazing story artist right here for you like Steve, remember that the most potent story you'll ever tell is the story you tell yourself. So make it a great one. Thanks so much for listening. Steve reminded me that the last time he and I spoke before this recording, we were talking about the and, but, therefore, and we didn't get to it in this episode, so we have a special little additional educational segment for you. Steve's back, and we are going to talk about the and, but, and therefore. Steve, what do you see as being so powerful about this ABT, Agile Narrative Framework?
The minute you mentioned it to me and explained it to me, I thought, right, I know where this is coming from. Now, obviously, I've read Randy Olson's books, so I know where it's coming from in that sense, but I know where it's coming from in a deeper sense. There is a body of work done on the way our brains work between left side and right side. There's a lot of rubbish written about left side, right side, but basically, to boil it down, the left side of our brain is kind of dealing with a task in hand. It's very much about control, and it's very much about manipulating the known world. Whereas the right side of our brain is kind of looking at the broad spectrum, so looking widely, like a radar, looking for threats around us. And it's the right side that notices weird stuff happening and alerts the left side, to get your head up out of the sand and to react to the new thing, the new threat that's coming in. And then, of course, what we do is we adapt to whatever threat comes in, and eventually it becomes part of what the left side of the brain does, because we're back to manipulating what is now the known world. But, of course, the known world is bigger and different because it's incorporating the new arrival of the new information. So this is what our brains do all the time. We go from left side to right side to left side to right side constantly. And the left side is, as I say, the task in hand. The right side is looking for threat and opportunity.
Is another way to think of that, Steve, is the left side is kind of focus, the right side is peripheral vision, if to use a vision metaphor?
Yeah, so if you imagine taking from the point of view of, I don't know, let's say you're a meerkat in the desert and you're scrabbling around in the sand looking for worms and scorpions to eat, but at the same time you're kind of aware constantly that there might be a hyena or an eagle about to jump on you from out of nowhere. So the way to think about it is chaos and order, and the left side of the brain is dealing with the world of order and getting on with the job in hand. The right side of the brain is alert to the possibility of chaos, and when something emerges from the chaos and shakes up our world, it's the right side that helps us cope with that. And then eventually we take that chaotic thing and we incorporate it into a new order, and we get on with the job having become a little bit older and wiser. So stories are constantly going from order into chaos and then emerging into a new order. And that's what ABT is all about. So the world of order is the world where we've got this and this. Okay, well, that's the world as you know it, and it's orderly. And if the world stayed like that, it wouldn't be a story because it's just boring. The stuff that doesn't change in your life is not the story.
It's non-narrative, isn't it? It's and.
Yeah, exactly. So the wardrobe doors behind you haven't fallen off. Yeah, the lamp hasn't gone out. The keyboard still works, and endlessly.
We have monsoon storms, and to your point, you are looking at my podcast studio. People can't see it here because they're listening to the show. You and I are video. So to your point, my order is I've got these wonderful colorful LED lights that with a push of a button from my mobile phone, I can light up spectacularly my studio. And I've got this wonderful old 73 Rhodes electric keyboard. But we were struck by lightning from a monsoon 2 weeks ago that fried some of our electronics in our brand new home. Therefore, you and I were late recording this show because we had to have Coulter Electric show up this morning and fix it. There's my ABT. I have order, then I have chaos. Now it's back to order.
Well, you see, now it's back to a new order, right? Because you've fixed it, right? And it's better than it was before. And if you've got a lightning rod now on your house, they'll direct any future lightning, then that's the new order, and it's better than the old order because you've adapted to the problem. So that's ABT, but it comes from order, chaos, new order, which is the same as once upon a time, order, suddenly a witch appears or whatever, chaos, happy ever after is new order. So it's ABT is order, chaos, new order. It's left brain, right brain, back to left brain again. So it's built in. ABT and this model of storytelling is built into us at a neurobiological level. And we share that with every human on the planet, and most of the animals on the planet too have that same left-right brain specialization. You need to teach people to tell stories, But you don't need to teach people to listen to stories. They love them.
Automatically. The irresistible pull of a good story, well told, based on the foundational element of the and, but, therefore.
You're absolutely right.
Thank you, Steve. That was such a great little exploration right there. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Great talking to you.